Chapter 10 covers violent crimes. We're skipping Chapter 9. Chapter 8, 4 through 8, we covered the theories that criminologists explore to explain criminality or why criminals commit criminal acts. In this chapter and the rest of the chapters through the semester, we're going to begin and then further discuss various types of crimes. In Chapter 10, we're going to cover violent crimes. And as you've seen, hopefully you've read Chapter 10. Chapter 10 opens with a discussion or an excerpt about Dylan Roof, who's the 21-year-old who opened fire on the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, where he killed 9 people. Per his statements on his website, it was clear that his actions were motivated by hate. He was convicted of numerous federal hate crimes, and then he was sentenced to death. He also pleaded guilty to 9 counts of murder and 3 attempted murder charges in the state of South Carolina. And if you're in Introduction to Criminal Justice, you'll know that the feds and the state can charge charges out of the same conduct. And that's what happened in this instance. The state of South Carolina went after him for murder charges. The feds went after for other crimes. Nonetheless, he avoided the second death penalty from the state of South Carolina. He has yet to be sentenced to death because he's in the appeal process. But nonetheless, he is on death row under a federal sentence. His acts are what are called expressive violence, meaning that the acts were designed to vent some sort of rage, anger, frustration. In his case, it was hate and racial hostility that motivated him. Other acts of violence are deemed as instrumental violence, which are designed to improve financial or social position, like armed robbery. That's an example of an instrumental violent crime. Or act of violence, instrumental violence. Violent crimes are also known as crimes against persons or personal crimes because they physically impact the victim. They are a kind that people generally fear the most. And we will explore specific violent crimes, including murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, as well as more contemporary interpersonal violence, such as workplace crimes and stalking and hate crimes. So what causes violence? This is kind of a recap with regards to our learned theories on on the theories that we learned on what causes one to commit a crime, or in this instance, we will focus on what causes one to commit an act of violence, not crime overall. We'll talk about a specific act of violence. Some believe it's a function, right, of a human trait and makeup. Some say it's improper socialization and upbringing. Others say it's culturally determined and relate to destructive social values. Personal traits. Research has shown that a significant number of young people convicted of murder suffer from mental abnormalities, including suffering from neurological impairment, such as severe seizures, lack of intelligence, as well as suffer from paranoia, illogical thinking, hallucinations, and even they commit animal cruelty. And animal cruelty has been associated with a number of psychotic disorders, such as antisocial personality. This is just one suspected cause of violence. There's others. Another is child abuse and neglect. There is support for the view that children who are subject to childhood emotional and physical abuse are more likely to use violence themselves. This is the concept of cycle of violence that was developed by criminologist Kathy Widow. She suggests that abuse by parents or caregivers is a direct cause of later abuse or violence caused by a child, which creates a never-ending cycle because they're predisposed of violence. The type of abuse a child is subjected to can include emotional, physical, sexual, emotional neglect, not showing love and affection, and even observing abuse, like if their child's observing domestic violence, or being subjected to harsh punishment or forms of corporal punishment. We'll talk more about child abuse. Human instinct is another cause of violence. Some theorists believe that human violent behavior is instinctual, that our early ancestors had to fight for dominance and would not hesitate to retaliate violently against aggressors, and therefore it's part of the human condition. Exposure. One who is constantly exposed to violent behavior at home, school, or environment may adopt violent methods themselves. Social learning theory. Living in disadvantaged neighborhoods exposes people routinely to violence. Areas where the community has little confidence in the police and are reluctant to call on them. Being a victim of a violent crime increases chances that a person may later engage in violent behavior. A child who is exposed at home and in the community to violence are the ones that are most likely to engage in violent crimes, according to the research. Substance abuse, another cause of violence. Substance abusers, I should say, are more likely than non-drug abusers to commit a violent act than non-substance users. In one of three ways, drug use influences violence. It could be a direct result of ingestion, right? It alters one's mood, and depending on the drug, it could affect cognitive thinking, reactional skills, miscommunication increases. So by actually taking the drug can influence violent behavior. The use of drugs causes economic compulsive behavior, which results to violent, somebody commits a robbery or a burglary to support a habit, especially robbery. Robbery is more a violent form than burglary. We'll discuss the differences. Violence escalates among drug rivals. That's a third way. Drug gangs use violence to protect their territories and to keep others from moving in. They tend to carry firearms, especially in larger urban markets, and if they're carrying large amounts of money or large amounts of drugs, they might be carrying a weapon. And in the event that either a drug deal goes bad or somebody tries to move in their territory or somebody tries to take the drugs or the money, can escalate into violence. Firearm availability. This is our next cause of violence. Firearm availability alone, that concept alone does not cause violence, but it is a facilitating factor. A petty argument may escalate into a fatal encounter if one party has a gun. The Uniform Crime Report from the FBI indicates that 70% of all murders and 40% of all robberies and 24% of aggravated assaults involved firearms. Handguns kill 2/3 of all police who die in the line of duty. A gun in the home increases the risk of suicide among adolescents, regardless of how secure that gun is in the home. Cultural values. In the late 1960s, criminologists Marvin Wolfgang and Franco Fioracchiudi launched a subculture of violence thesis, which attempted to outline framework for the examination of violent subcultures. Central to their discussion was the idea that higher rates of violence among lower class and racialized populations could be explained by the fact that these groups have embraced values and norms. This theory assumes the existence of distinct subcultural pro-violent values that develop in opposition to the dominant middle class norms and values. These neighborhood residents solve their problems or their conflicts without calling the police due to distrust or devaluing, even if it means hurting or killing another. So using violence is within the subculture that the individuals who live in that culture understand that that's the norm. That's what we do. National values, it's along the same lines as cultural values. Some countries have high violence rates while others do not. But there's two explanations for this. First, the nations with high violence embrace the value structures that embrace violence, while others embrace communication and or restorative justice measures. And second, those with high violence rates, those countries with high violence rates also have high poverty, income inequality, substance use, illiteracy, and it's these factors that produce the high violent rates, not the culture. So those are some of the causes of violence that have been researched. Next, and through the rest of this chapter, we are going to explore the various violent crimes.